What I want to introduce today is not another real estate marketing strategy. It's a fundamentally different operating philosophy. For decades, the real estate industry has been built around information imbalance. Consumers have been expected to trust professionals without fully understanding how incentives work, how pricing works, or how to evaluate expertise objectively. But consumer behavior has changed. Modern buyers and sellers no longer want polished persuasion. They want clarity. They want transparency. And most importantly, they want frameworks that help them think independently. What we're building is what I call the consumer education layer, a system designed to move consumers from blind trust to informed evaluation. This presentation is about how education becomes the acquisition strategy, how transparency becomes the differentiator, and how trust is earned through explanation instead of performance theater. This is Steve Koleno, and this is Confidential Remarks. Historically, the industry operated like a black box. Consumers brought their money, their trust, and their time into a system they didn't fully understand. And in return, they were often given one message: trust me. The problem is that very few people were ever taught how to evaluate the person representing them. Most consumers know how to compare homes. Very few know how to compare advisors. That distinction matters because when expertise becomes difficult to measure, branding replaces evidence. Awards replace transparency. Scripts replace explanation. And for decades, that worked. But the internet changed the psychology of trust. Consumers now expect visibility into incentives, pricing structures, conflicts of interest, and decision-making processes. Long-term authority can no longer be built through manufactured prestige alone. It has to be built through clarity, evidence, and education. This is the pivot. The old model said, trust me. The modern model says, don't trust anyone blindly. Learn how to evaluate. That is a completely different relationship with the consumer. We are not positioning ourselves as gatekeepers. We are positioning ourselves as translators, investigators, and educators. Our role becomes helping consumers recognize hidden incentives, decode industry jargon, identify fake positioning, and understand what true alignment actually looks like. That changes the power dynamic entirely. When consumers understand how the system works, they become harder to manipulate and easier to serve honestly. And that's the key insight here. Education is not anti-business. Education is what creates durable trust at scale. This slide breaks down the two competing philosophies in the industry today. The traditional salesperson model depends on control. Information is filtered. Pricing is obscured. Authority is manufactured. And the consumer is guided toward a transaction. The advisor model operates differently. Transparency becomes proactive instead of reactive. Incentives are disclosed up front. Consumers are encouraged to evaluate options critically rather than emotionally. The goal shifts from closing to alignment. That's an important distinction. An advisor is comfortable educating a consumer, even if the consumer chooses another path. A salesperson is optimized to preserve momentum toward a deal. Consumers feel that difference immediately. And as trust in institutions continues to decline broadly across society, the advisor model becomes increasingly powerful because it aligns with how modern consumers already think. What you're looking at here is the operating system behind the entire framework. These 5 pillars work together to create what I call investigative authority. Not authority built on branding alone. Authority built on pattern recognition, transparency, and consumer protection. The first pillar exposes misinformation and manufactured credibility. The second gives consumers a practical evaluation framework. The third investigates the mechanics of the industry itself. The fourth reframes the behavioral differences between advisors and salespeople. And the fifth establishes a clear consumer bill of rights. Together, these pillars create something much more powerful than marketing content. They create vocabulary. And once consumers have vocabulary, they can identify manipulation much faster. The purpose of this pillar is not outrage. It's clarity, Consumers are surrounded by credibility theater. Titles, awards, rankings, luxury branding, and vague claims that sound impressive but often lack measurable standards. So this content calmly deconstructs those signals. What does luxury specialist actually mean? How are top agent rankings calculated? What percentage of a commission actually stays with the agent? What data is missing from bios and testimonials? When consumers begin asking those questions, the psychology changes. The objective here is not to attack people. It's to normalize critical thinking. Because once consumers realize how much positioning in the industry is unverified, they start demanding evidence instead of performance. This pillar transforms education into action. The advisor test is designed as a simple pass or fail framework consumers can use during real conversations. Can the advisor explain pricing clearly? Can they provide verified third-party outcome data? Would they recommend a lower-cost option if it genuinely served the client better? Those questions reveal alignment very quickly. Pressure tactics, vague language, and emotional urgency tend to collapse under structured evaluation. That's why this framework matters. It gives consumers a portable decision-making tool they can carry into any interaction, not just real estate, but any high-stakes advisory environment. And the more consumers adopt structured evaluation frameworks, the harder manipulation becomes. This is where the framework becomes investigative. Most consumers never see the economic incentives underneath the industry. They see polished branding on the surface, but not the mechanics underneath. This pillar exposes those mechanics. How do portal advertising systems actually work? How are referral fees structured? How is consumer data bought, sold, and recycled inside lead generation ecosystems? How are certain market statistics manipulated to shape perception? These are not conspiracy theories. They are operational realities most consumers simply never get visibility into. And when you consistently explain hidden systems clearly and calmly, you become trusted not because you claim authority, but because you reduce confusion. That is the foundation of modern trust. Consumers may not always understand industry structures, but they absolutely understand behavior. They can feel pressure. They can feel urgency. They can feel when someone is steering them emotionally instead of educating them strategically. This comparison makes those differences visible. A salesperson optimizes for persuasion and momentum. An advisor optimizes for understanding and alignment. One hides incentives. The other discloses them. One creates dependency. The other creates informed independence. And here's the important part. Modern consumers increasingly reward the second model because it feels safer, smarter, and more respectful. Trust today is behavioral. Consumers watch how you explain, how you disclose, and how comfortable you are with transparency. This pillar defines the standard consumers should expect from anyone representing them. Transparent pricing, clear alternatives, verified expertise, honest risk assessment, no hidden incentives, and advisor accountability. What's important here is that these should not be premium features. These should be baseline expectations. The industry often treats transparency as optional. Consumers increasingly see it as mandatory. And once expectations shift culturally, the old operating models begin to lose credibility very quickly. That is the deeper strategy behind this framework. We are not just educating consumers. We are redefining what consumers consider acceptable. This is the content architecture behind the education layer. Half of the content is pure consumer advocacy. A quarter is investigative journalism style analysis. Another segment focuses on practical advisor education. And only a very small percentage is direct positioning. That ratio matters enormously. Because the moment content feels like disguised advertising, trust collapses. The editorial rule is simple. If a piece of content looks like traditional real estate marketing, it failed. We attract, we do not chase. And the way we attract is by consistently helping consumers feel more informed, more protected, and more capable of making intelligent decisions. Different content formats serve different psychological purposes. Short-form content creates discovery and disruption. It grabs attention and challenges assumptions. Mid-form content builds analytical understanding. It gives consumers frameworks and context. Long-form content creates conviction and trust. That's where deep credibility is built. The key is that every layer feeds the next. A short-form spot the BS clip creates curiosity. An advisor comparison builds evaluation skills. A deep transparency investigation builds long-term authority. This is not random content creation. It is a structured trust-building ecosystem designed around consumer psychology. The viral hook here is not real estate. The viral hook is the realization that consumers have been navigating major financial decisions with far less transparency than they assumed. That realization resonates across multiple audiences. Younger consumers already distrust gatekeepers and institutional messaging. First-time buyers want protection frameworks. Frustrated sellers want validation for negative past experiences. The common denominator is the demand for transparency. And transparency spreads because people share information that makes them feel more aware, more protected, and more empowered. That's why this model scales naturally. It aligns with existing consumer sentiment instead of fighting against it. This is the synthesis of the entire framework. First, we deconstruct opaque systems. Then we arm consumers with practical frameworks. Then we deploy those ideas across the media ecosystem at scale. And eventually consumers cross what I call the education layer threshold. At that point, the old model becomes impossible to unsee. Consumers begin evaluating incentives differently. They ask better questions. They expect transparency automatically. And when that happens, the brand no longer functions as just another service provider. It becomes the organization that permanently changed how consumers think about representation itself. That is the strategic objective. Ultimately, this was never just about real estate. It's about changing the default assumptions consumers bring into one of the most important financial decisions of their lives. We are not trying to yell louder than the market. We are trying to increase consumer clarity, because once people learn how to evaluate incentives, recognize manipulation, and demand transparency, the entire relationship between advisor and consumer changes. And that change is permanent. The future belongs to organizations willing to educate before they persuade, disclose before they position, and empower before they close. This has been Confidential Remarks.